An ordinary evening at a corner diner suddenly turned into a nightmare. Beneath the dim glow of neon lights, a young woman was cornered by two bullies, their cold voices echoing through the room, silencing everyone. Sitting in the corner, a black single father and his little daughter only wanted to enjoy their meal in peace. But then, the girl turned to her father and whispered the fateful question, "Daddy, can we help her?" That moment set off a chain of events no one could have foreseen: a tense confrontation with the bullies, a ruthless retaliation, and a stunning reversal that shook the entire town. Before we begin this breathtaking journey, let us know where you are watching from. And do not forget to hit like and subscribe so you will not miss the next stories where every bully must face the ending they deserve. Friday nights on Maple Street were usually nothing special. Small diners glowed under neon lights, the warmth from the grills drifting out onto the sidewalks, mingling with the tinkling sound of wind chimes every time the door opened. For Marcus Johnson, a black man in his mid-30s, and his young daughter Zoe, it was one of those rare moments when they could set aside their worries and find a little peace. Marcus was just an ordinary mechanic working all week in a small repair shop. The job wasn't lucrative, barely enough to breathe easy at the end of each month, but it kept the two of them alive since the day his wife passed away. His hands were calloused. The smell of motor oil clung to every thread of his shirt, but whenever he saw Zoe smile, he knew it was all worth it. Zoe, a 7-year-old girl with eyes bright like stars, her hair neatly braided into two little plaits, always clung tightly to her father's hand as they stepped into the corner diner. To her, it felt like entering another world. The soft country music, the sweet smell of pancakes, and the waitress who always slipped an extra red cherry onto her sundae. "Daddy, can I get pancakes again tonight?" Marcus chuckled, his deep voice warm. "Of course, Zoe. Pancakes it is." He pulled out her chair and then sat down across from her, leaning lightly against the old wooden seat. That small habit made Zoe smile because her father always made her feel like a princess in their little castle of two. Outside the glass window, the streetlights cast long shadows across the damp pavement after the rain. Few people passed by, all in a hurry, while inside the diner scattered customers enjoyed their quiet meals. Marcus breathed deeply, savoring the rare feeling of not having to worry about bills or the pile of repairs waiting at the shop. His eyes wandered to Zoe, who was coloring in a small book. She always carried her box of crayons, the one her mother had bought before she died. Every time Zoe finished a drawing, Marcus thought of his wife's gentle eyes, as if her love still lingered around them. "Daddy, when I finish, can you hang this picture in the shop?" Marcus nodded, the corners of his lips lifting. "Every picture you draw deserves a special spot, Zoe." Everything seemed as if it would remain peaceful, if not for a small shift in the air. As Marcus glanced around, he noticed the laughter and chatter in the diner suddenly dip. Some customers discreetly glanced toward the door where a loud metallic clank had just sounded. Two men walked in. They weren't regulars. Marcus had never seen them before. One was tall and broad-shouldered, filling the aisle with his frame, the other thinner but with sly eyes that glimmered with mischief. Neither looked for a seat. Instead, they immediately headed toward a table in the corner. There, a young woman sat alone, clutching her leather bag tightly, her eyes blinking rapidly. Marcus frowned slightly. He didn't know her, but from the tension etched across her face, he knew she was not comfortable. Chairs scraped harshly, and a coarse voice cut through the air, shattering the calm. "Evening, sweetheart. Sitting alone. Not safe these days." The woman said nothing, only shook her head slightly, but the man leaned closer, his elbow resting on her table, his breath spilling into the space between them. "Why don't you keep us company? We can make your night fun." Zoe lifted her head from the page, her eyes widening. She gripped her father's hand tightly under the table. "Daddy!" Her voice trembled, barely a whisper. "Can we help her?" Marcus swallowed hard. His heart grew heavy. He had never been the kind of man to go looking for trouble. All his life he had only known engines and gears, quietly working to raise his daughter. He was no cop, no soldier, just a father. But now Zoe's eyes forced him to make a choice. He thought briefly if he stood up what would happen. Those two didn't look like easy men, but if he stayed silent he would let his daughter witness a woman being threatened right before her eyes and teach her that silence was the way to live. Marcus turned to Zoe, looking straight into her eyes. They were filled with trust, as if she believed her father could do anything, believed he was the only hero she would ever need, and Marcus knew he could no longer stay seated. He placed his hand on the table and rose. The chair scraped backward, its wooden legs grinding against the floor, a sound sharp enough to make a few customers turn their heads. The diner fell into silence. Marcus walked with steady steps, his work boots thudding rhythmically on the tiled floor. He moved toward the table where the two men were laughing loudly. The young woman looked up, her fearful eyes meeting the calm steadiness in his gaze. Marcus stopped right in front of them, his deep voice resonating. "Is there a problem here?" The two men glanced at each other, then burst into mocking laughter. One smirked. "Yeah, the problem is you sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." Marcus did not flinch. His back was straight, his eyes unwavering. "She's my business, not tonight." The air thickened. Forks and knives, stilled glasses, froze mid-air in people's hands. A few phones were raised, recording secretly. In that moment, every eye in the diner fixed on Marcus, a single father in worn work clothes, yet standing like a wall between the bullies and their target. The young woman trembled, but in her eyes flickered a spark of hope. From across the room, Zoe sat at their table, her heart pounding, but her lips whispered softly to herself, "Daddy's not afraid." The air inside the diner seemed frozen. Every eye was fixed on Marcus, the single father who had dared to step into danger. But in front of him, the two men showed no sign of backing down. On the contrary, Marcus's appearance seemed to amuse them, like they had just found a new plaything. The larger one, wearing a crumpled black leather jacket, planted both hands on the table and growled, "You really want to get involved in this, old man?" Marcus didn't move, his gaze steady. He knew that if he backed down now, it would only leave Zoe with an ugly lesson. She said no, that should be enough. The thinner one beside him let out a raspy laugh that echoed across the diner. "Look at this Daryl. We got ourselves a hero, a grease monkey who thinks he's Superman." The mocking words made some customers shiver, but no one dared step in. Everyone held their breath, waiting to see how it would unfold. The young woman at the table clutched her handbag so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wanted to get up to leave, but her legs felt nailed to the floor. Marcus lowered his voice, but each word was crystal clear. "Walk away. Tonight's not the night." But instead of retreating, the bigger man leaned in until his face was inches from Marcus, his breath heavy with alcohol. "Or what, you gonna fix my car to death? You think just because your kid is watching we're gonna back down?" Zoe still sat at the far table, her tiny hands clutching her coloring book. She trembled, but her eyes never left her father. To her, Marcus was a shield, even against men twice his size. Marcus didn't respond with anger. He stood tall, shifting just enough to block the men's line of sight to the woman. "She's under my protection now." A heavy silence fell. The diner seemed swallowed whole by the moment. Then suddenly the thin man lunged across the table, grabbed the glass of water in front of him, and hurled it to the floor. The shattering crash rang out, making a few diners scream. "You don't get it, do you? We own this town. If she doesn't listen, she pays the price." The woman broke into sobs, her shoulders shaking. Marcus clenched his fists, but his voice remained calm. The only ones paying tonight will be you if you don't leave." The defiance made both men spring to their feet. Chairs toppled back, boots slammed onto the floor. Nearby customers scrambled away, pulling chairs aside to clear the space. Someone quickly dialed the phone, their voice trembling. "There's a fight about to break out at Maple Diner." The big man, Daryl, jabbed a thick finger into Marcus's chest. "You just made the worst mistake of your life." Marcus still didn't move. His fear was no longer for himself, but for Zoe. Yet when he turned and caught her small eyes from across the room, that gaze filled him with a resolve stronger than anything else. The mistake would be letting you hurt her. Each second stretched into eternity. The two men looked at each other as if weighing whether to strike, but the silence around them unsettled them. Because now it wasn't just Marcus standing there, dozens of eyes were watching. Finally, Daryl snorted and jerked his chin at his partner. "This ain't over." The two backed away, casting threatening glares before shoving the door so hard it nearly came off its hinges. The wind chimes clattered loudly, leaving a tense void behind them. The woman collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her hands. Her breath came in ragged gasps, tears streaming down her cheeks. Marcus turned toward her, his voice softening. "You're safe now. They're gone." She shook her head, her voice hoarse. "You don't know what they're capable of." Before Marcus could ask more, Zoe had already left her seat, running toward him, her small arms wrapping tightly around his waist. "Daddy, you stopped them. You were like a superhero." Marcus bent down, resting a hand on her braided hair. He forced a smile, though in his heart he didn't feel like a hero at all. All he knew was that tonight he couldn't let Zoe witness the silence of complicity. The diner gradually returned to its rhythm, but what had just happened lingered like a shadow. A few customers approached, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder, nodding in silent thanks. The waitress handed tissues to the shaken young woman, her own eyes still wide with fear. Marcus returned to the table, guiding Zoe back into her seat. He asked for the check because their peaceful dinner had turned into a storm. "Daddy, are they going to come back?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He looked into his daughter's innocent eyes, then nodded gently to reassure her. "Not tonight, Zoe. Not tonight." But inside a vague unease began to take root. He knew men like that rarely stopped after just one attempt, and if they came back, tonight was only the beginning. That night the diner slowly returned to quiet, but Marcus's mind did not. On the drive home with Zoe, the images kept replaying the terrified face of the woman, the mocking laughter of the two men, and most of all his daughter's question. "Daddy, can we help her?" Zoe sat in the back seat, clutching her coloring book, her eyes wide open even though it was late. Marcus glanced at the rearview mirror and saw her reflection, fearful yet full of trust. "Daddy, are you sure they won't come back?" Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter. He couldn't promise what he wasn't sure of, but he also didn't want to burden her with more fear. "They won't hurt us, Zoe, not as long as I'm here." Their small apartment was in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of town. When they arrived, Marcus carried Zoe to her room and tucked her in carefully. She gave a faint smile and whispered, before drifting off to sleep, "Daddy, tonight you were a superhero." Marcus sat silently by the bed, looking at that innocent face. He wondered, was he truly a hero, or just a reckless man who had dragged his daughter into something dangerous? The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds. Marcus woke early, made coffee, and got Zoe ready for school. But as soon as he stepped outside, he noticed unfamiliar looks from the neighbors. They had heard. The story from last night at the diner had already spread. Someone had even posted a video online. A middle-aged man at the gate called out, "Saw you on Facebook last night, Marcus. Brave thing you did." Marcus nodded politely, but inside he felt uneasy. He didn't want to be the center of attention. He only wanted a quiet life, raising Zoe in peace. At school, when Zoe entered class, some children whispered, "Her dad's the guy from the diner video." He stood up to those bullies. Zoe lifted her chin, feeling both proud and anxious. Marcus watched from a distance and sighed. He knew that attention could quickly turn into a shadow of trouble. When he returned to his repair shop, his unease deepened. On the front door, a long scratch stretched across the metal as if someone had deliberately clawed it. On the window, a red spray-painted message read, "Stay out of our business." Marcus froze the blood in his veins, turning cold. He didn't need to guess who was responsible. Inside the shop, the familiar smell of motor oil no longer brought its usual comfort. Marcus sank into the old chair, running a hand through his messy hair. A flood of questions echoed in his mind. Should he call the police? Should he take Zoe somewhere else? Or should he pretend nothing had happened, hoping it would all fade away? He knew well silence could make things worse, but if he kept fighting back, he might put them both in greater danger. While Marcus was lost in thought, the phone rang. An unknown number flashed on the screen. He hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Johnson." A woman's voice came through, low but trembling. "Yes, who is this?" "It's me, the woman from the diner. My name is Clara Reynolds." The name made Marcus pause. Reynolds. He had heard it before. Reynolds Industries was one of the largest corporations in the state, with thousands of employees and a massive trucking fleet. "I owe you my thanks." "But I also owe you an apology," Clara continued. "Those men, they weren't random thugs. They were sent to intimidate me. You got pulled into something bigger than you realize." Marcus closed his eyes, tightening his grip on the phone. He had only thought he was stepping in to protect a woman being harassed. Now he realized that behind it was a power struggle far larger. "Listen, Ms. Reynolds," he replied, his voice low. "I didn't do it for anything in return. I just couldn't let Zoe see me sit by and do nothing." On the other end, Clara was silent for a moment, then said softly, "That's exactly why I believe you're the kind of man who can't be broken by intimidation." Marcus hung up, his heart torn. On one hand, he wanted to keep Zoe far from it all. On the other, he knew those two men wouldn't stop. The warning scrawled on his shop that morning was only the beginning. He stepped outside, staring at the gray sky. The wind blew dust into his face, dry and harsh. In his mind, Zoe's voice echoed again. "Daddy, can we help her?" A needle pricking his conscience. He understood now life sometimes forced you to a crossroads, stay silent and safe, or stand up to protect what was right. Marcus clenched his oil-stained hands and drew in a deep breath. He had made his choice. If they come again, he whispered to himself, "I won't back down." That afternoon, Marcus drove to pick up Zoe. She ran out of the school gate, backpack bouncing, her face glowing with joy. She had no idea of the storm looming ahead. But for Marcus, just seeing that smile was enough to remind him he would do anything to protect her, because this time the choice was no longer just about protecting a stranger in a diner. It was about protecting Zoe's future from the shadow of bullying and injustice closing in. That evening, Marcus took Zoe back to Maple Street Diner. He knew there might be trouble, but he didn't want his daughter to feel like they had to run and hide. Fear was never the answer. The diner glowed with lights, the familiar clinking of spoons and forks filling the air. Zoe sat in their usual corner, her curious eyes glancing at the window, though Marcus could see she was still uneasy. "Daddy, do you think those men will come back?" Marcus held her small hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "If they do, Zoe will face it together." Sure enough, less than 15 minutes later, the door swung open. The wind chimes clashed harshly. The two men from before appeared, their faces dark, their demeanor openly hostile. Daryl, the tall one, scanned the room and locked eyes with Marcus. The diner fell silent. Some customers whispered while others subtly raised their phones. The atmosphere stretched taut, ready to snap. Darryl stomped forward, his heavy boots echoing across the floor. Well, well, the mechanic thinks he's some kind of hero. Marcus didn't rise immediately. He set down his spoon, wiped his mouth, then looked straight at him. "Leave us alone, Darryl. You've caused enough trouble." The thinner man beside him sneered. "Or what, you'll fix us with a wrench? You humiliated us in front of the whole diner last time. Tonight we settle it." Zoe clutched her father's hand tighter, her eyes wide. Marcus turned his gaze steady and reassuring. He knew he couldn't back away. If he stayed silent now, Zoe would witness Bullies running unchecked. He stood up, his back straight facing the two men. "She's not yours to threaten, and I won't let you scare my daughter or anyone else here." Darryl smirked, then suddenly grabbed Marcus by the shoulder and shoved him back. The chair slammed into the wall with a loud crash. Shouts erupted as diners scrambled away. Marcus staggered but didn't fall. He pivoted, knocking Darryl's hand off. "Don't touch me." The thin man lunged, aiming for Marcus's collar. In that instant, years of working with strong hands kicked in. Marcus blocked the grab, twisted the man's wrist, and forced him down onto the table. A groan echoed, silencing the diner. Darryl roared and charged, throwing a heavy punch. Marcus dodged just in time. The fist smashed into the table, shattering cups and glasses. Marcus didn't retaliate with violence. Instead, he stepped back, maintaining a defensive stance. "Walk away, Darryl. You don't want this." Darryl's breath came in ragged gasps, veins bulging in his neck, his eyes red with rage. But the silence pressing in weighed heavier. Dozens of eyes and recording phones were on him, and that hesitation showed. "This ain't over, Johnson. You and your kid, you'll regret it." He yanked his partner up, both of them venting their fury by kicking chairs aside, before storming out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. The tension broke as soon as they were gone. A few people clapped hesitantly. The waitress, her hands trembling, brought water to Marcus. Her voice soft. "Thank you for standing up to them. No one ever does." Marcus nodded, but his eyes were heavy. He felt no joy, no pride. He knew the threats weren't empty, and next time they might not come with bare hands. Zoe hugged him tightly, whispering, "Daddy, they looked so mad. What if they hurt you?" Marcus bent down, resting a hand on her back. "They won't, Zoe, because I'll never give them the chance." That night, after bringing Zoe home, Marcus forced a smile to ease her mind. But once she was asleep, he sat alone in the living room, the yellow light casting weary shadows on his face. Darryl's words echoed in his head, "You'll regret it." He knew bullies who lost face in public rarely let things go, and his actions tonight had doubled their humiliation. Marcus drew a deep breath and looked at Zoe's unfinished drawing pinned on the wall, a bright flower inside a small tin box, the innocent symbol of her childhood. He told himself no matter what happens, he would never let anyone steal that piece away. The next day, gray skies hung heavy over the neighborhood. When Marcus opened the doors of his repair shop, he immediately noticed something off. The metal door still bore dense streaks of red paint, smeared like blood not yet scrubbed away. Zoe stood beside him, clutching her school backpack, squeezing her father's hand. "Daddy, are they coming here too?" Marcus knelt down to meet her eyes, his voice firm. "They might, Zoe, but this shop is our home, and no one takes that from us." He walked her to school, trying to keep a calm face, but inside every step felt weighted with stone. He knew Darryl hadn't just made empty threats the night before. Men like him always came back to prove they were the strong ones. That afternoon, while Marcus was changing the oil in an old truck, the roar of an engine thundered outside the alley. A black pickup skidded to a stop in front of the shop, dust rising in clouds. The doors swung open. Daryl and the thin man from before stepped out, joined by a new face, a hulking figure, arms covered in tattoos. Daryl smirked when he saw Marcus standing there in his grease-stained work clothes, sweat glistening on his brow. "Told you this ain't over." Marcus set his tools down and wiped his hands with a rag. He knew this was the moment, but instead of fear, his eyes burned with resolve. "You came here to scare me in front of my daughter. Not happening." The tattooed man stepped forward, his boots thudding heavily on the metal floor. "No kid here now, Johnson. Just you and us." A few curious neighbors peeked out from their windows. One raised a phone, already recording. The air was strung tight like a wire about to snap. Daryl lunged, grabbing Marcus by the collar and yanking hard. "You humiliated me in front of everyone at that diner. Now I'll show them who's boss." From down the street, Zoe had run back from school just in time to see it. She screamed out, "Daddy!" The cry struck Marcus like a spark to his heart. He twisted, seizing Daryl's wrist and wrenching it to the side. Daryl groaned, releasing his grip. Marcus stepped back, his voice ringing like steel. "I'm not looking for trouble, but I won't let you hurt me or threaten my daughter." The tattooed brute charged like an animal, swinging a heavy fist. Marcus dodged, pivoted, and used the man's own momentum to slam him onto the concrete floor. The impact echoed, neighbors gasping in shock. The thin man tried to circle around, but Marcus was faster. He blocked with his solid forearm, then forced him down across the workbench. Tools clattered, a can of oil spilled across the ground. In a matter of moments, all three were subdued by a lone mechanic. Not a single strike carried malice, only control. Yet it was enough to leave the bullies stunned and breathless. Daryl staggered up, his face red with rage and humiliation. "This isn't over, Johnson. You'll regret standing up to us." Marcus exhaled sharply, his eyes like ice. "The only regret I'll ever have is teaching my daughter to stay silent in front of bullies." The words rang through the shop, carrying out into the street. A neighbor recording the scene whispered, "That's going viral." Daryl and his crew stumbled back, cursing, as they scrambled into their truck. The tires screeched, spewing dust that clouded the entrance. The shop was left in disarray, but Marcus stood firm as Zoe rushed to wrap her arms around him. "Daddy, you didn't let them win." Marcus looked at her and nodded gently, but inside he knew this was only the beginning. They would be back, and next time it might not be with bare fists. Looking around, he saw neighbors gathered, some nodding with respect. For the first time, Marcus realized he wasn't alone. The truth was clear: when one person stood up, an entire community could be awakened. That night, after Zoe had fallen asleep, Marcus sat alone at his workbench, the dim light casting shadows over his weary face. He knew he had stepped into a larger battle, but he also knew that with each confrontation, Zoe was learning one powerful lesson: never bow to bullies. The next morning, the sunlight wasn't enough to chase away the bitter cold of the neighborhood, but Marcus's repair shop was already crowded with voices. News of yesterday's confrontation had spread like wildfire. The video of Marcus subduing 3 men had been shared all over social media. Some neighbors came by, equal parts curious and admiring. An older man shook Marcus's hand, his voice full of pride. "You showed them, Marcus. Someone had to." Marcus forced a smile, but inside he felt no relief. He hadn't been seeking the spotlight. He only wanted to protect his daughter and live in peace. Meanwhile, Zoe stepped out carrying a new drawing. She proudly showed it to everyone. "My daddy is the bravest man I know." The innocent words moved some to tears, but they weighed heavily on Marcus's shoulders. He knew that yesterday's courage had placed both him and Zoe right in the center of the storm. Not long after, a sleek sedan pulled up in front of the shop. The door opened and out stepped the woman Marcus had defended at the diner, Clara Reynolds. This time, there was no trace of fear, She appeared in a dark business dress, radiating authority. Marcus wiped his hands and walked over. "Ms. Reynolds." Clara nodded, her gaze stern yet grateful. "Mr. Johnson, I'm here because yesterday's events went further than I expected. Those men, they're not just bullies. They're connected to people who want to see me fail." Marcus frowned. "So they came after me to get to you." Clara nodded slightly. "And I won't let you and your daughter pay the price for standing up for me." Zoe tugged on her father's sleeve, whispering, "Daddy, is she the lady from the diner?" Marcus bent down and nodded. "Yes, Zoe, and she's here to thank us." Clara gave Zoe a gentle smile. "More than thank you. What your father did. It reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten, that courage still exists in ordinary places." Zoe grinned brightly, then ran back inside, leaving the adults to talk. Clara opened her leather briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. "Mr. Johnson Reynolds Industries has one of the largest vehicle fleets in the state. Maintenance, repairs, inspections. It's a contract worth more than you can imagine." Marcus's brow furrowed and he stepped back slightly. "Why me? I'm just a small-town mechanic." Clara met his eyes directly, because the kind of man who listens when his daughter says, "Can we help her?" is the kind of man I trust with my company's name. Marcus fell silent. Her words cut deep. For years he had only thought of himself as a worn-out laborer, trying to keep a small household standing. Now a tremendous opportunity lay before him, but so did the weight of responsibility. Could he handle it? He sighed, wiping the oil-stained hands on his old rag. "I don't know if I'm the man you think I am, but I do know one thing: I can't let bullies win. Not in that diner, not here. Not anywhere near my daughter." Clara smiled faintly. "Then we're on the same side." But not everyone was happy about this development. That evening, as Marcus was closing the shop, he noticed the familiar black pickup parked nearby. Inside, Darryl and his crew sat waiting, hatred burning in their eyes. Darryl flicked his cigarette to the ground, grinding it under his boot as he growled, "He thinks he won. He has no idea what's coming." Marcus led Zoe inside their apartment, his heart heavy. He knew that even though Clara had power and contracts, those bullies were still out there, watching, waiting. Night fell, and the small apartment sank into silence. Zoe slept peacefully, clutching her worn-out teddy bear. Marcus sat by the window, staring at the glow of the street lamp outside, his mind racing. He knew now that this battle was no longer just between him and the bullies. It had become a clash between justice and the dark forces gripping the town. And this time he wasn't only fighting for himself. He was fighting to preserve the trust shining in his daughter's eyes. Monday morning, the air in Crestwood felt thick and heavy. Videos of Marcus subduing the thugs at his shop had spread across the town. People whispered about it in the market, in coffee shops, even on the playground at Zoe's school. To many, Marcus had become the image of a brave father, but to the men he had humiliated, the story was different. They saw it as an insult that had to be avenged. When Zoe walked into class, a few kids rushed over. "Your dad's a superhero. I saw the video, Zoe. He flipped that guy like in the movies." Zoe smiled shyly, but inside she felt uneasy. She remembered too clearly the look of hatred in Darryl's eyes the night before. On the other side of town, Darryl sat in a dingy bar, his hand wrapped in bandages, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. The thin man beside him drained his beer, his voice hoarse. "We can't let this slide. Everyone's laughing at us." Darryl slammed the table bottles, rattling. "Johnson humiliated us, in front of his kid, in front of cameras. If we don't crush him, we're done in this town." The tattooed man nodded, his eyes cold. "Then we hit him where it hurts. His little girl." That afternoon, when Zoe's classes ended, Marcus was already there to pick her up. He wanted to be sure she was safe. But as he pulled into the school lot, he noticed a group of strangers loitering near the fence, their eyes fixed on them. One of them smirked when Zoe appeared. Marcus squeezed her hand tighter. "Stay close, Zoe. Don't look at them." Zoe nodded, though her eyes showed her worry. They hurried into the car, but Marcus knew the net was tightening. That night, the repair shop was vandalized again. Glass shattered across the floor, oil cans spilled everywhere. On the wall, in crude red paint, were the words, "Next time the kid." Marcus froze. His breathing grew harsh, the veins bulging in his clenched fists. He had never felt such fury. Zoe stepped in from behind, eyes wide. "Daddy." "What does it mean?" Marcus knelt and pulled her close. "It means they're cowards, Zoe, and cowards write threats when they're afraid." But he knew this was no longer a simple scare tactic. They had targeted his daughter directly. Clara Reynolds arrived soon after, flanked by her personal security. She looked around the wreckage, anger flashing in her eyes. "They won't stop, Marcus. They're being pushed by people who want me out of the picture, hurting you, hurting Zoe. It's their way of scaring me." Marcus sighed, his voice rough. "Then they picked the wrong father. Because I'd rather fight them every day than let Zoe think bullies get to win." Clara studied him, thoughtful. "You remind me of my father. He taught me the same thing." The police were called, but they only filed a report and left. One officer even advised Marcus to avoid trouble. He gave a bitter laugh. Avoid trouble. When trouble had already come to his doorstep and written Zoe's name on the wall. That night Marcus sat alone in the darkened shop, his hands resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the smeared threat. In the shadows he whispered a vow. "If they come for her, they'll find me waiting." The next day things grew worse. At recess, Zoe was cornered by a group of older kids. They mocked her, mimicking Daryl's voice. "Where's your superhero dad now? Maybe he can fight grown men, but he can't be here to save you at school." Zoe bit her lip, tears welling. But instead of crying, she remembered her father's words. "Bullies are cowards." She straightened her back, looked at them, her voice trembling but clear. "You can laugh, but my daddy never backs down." Her reply made the group falter. A teacher appeared and they scattered. But inside Zoe, a small flame had been lit. Courage, even in the face of fear. That night, while the city slept, Marcus's small apartment still glowed with light. Zoe had drifted into slumber, clutching her worn teddy bear, but Marcus couldn't rest. He sat at the kitchen table, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the paper scrawled with the threat, "Next time the kid." Every red letter burned like fire in his mind. Marcus had never feared for himself, but for Zoe. Just imagining her in danger made his chest tighten painfully. A sudden knock at the door jolted him upright. He stepped cautiously to the entrance. When he opened it, Clara Reynolds stood there, flanked by 2 bodyguards. Her eyes blazed as if carrying news too urgent to wait until morning. Clara entered, setting aside her coat, her voice tense. "Marcus, I owe you the full truth. You need to know what you're up against." Marcus crossed his arms, leaning back against the counter. "I figured as much. Those men aren't just punks off the street." Clara nodded, her eyes sharp. "They work for Nathan Cole. He's been after me for months. He wants control of a steel plant Reynolds Industries is about to acquire. Last week I refused his under-the-table offer. Since then, intimidation threats. Yesterday they targeted you because you embarrassed his men at the diner. Now they're coming harder." Marcus frowned, tapping his fingers on the table. "So this isn't about me, it's about your deal." Clara shook her head. "It's about both now, because you stood up when no one else would. That makes you a target, but it also makes you the kind of ally I can trust." For a few seconds, silence filled the room. Marcus exhaled heavily, then dropped into a chair. "I fix cars, Clara. I raise my daughter. That's it. I didn't ask for this war. Clara lowered her voice, stepping closer. Neither did I. But here we are, and sometimes, Marcus, fate chooses us. The question is, do we step back, or do we fight back? Marcus looked down at his calloused hands, remembering Zoe's terrified eyes when she saw those red letters. Her words echoed in his mind. Daddy, can we help her? I can't back down. Not anymore. Clara sat opposite him, pulled a USB drive from her bag, and set it on the table. Inside are records, transactions, proof that Nathan has been bribing officials and running illegal operations. If this gets to the authorities, he's finished. But he knows it, which is why he's desperate to silence me. Marcus touched the USB, feeling the invisible weight it carried. So this little stick is why my daughter's name is on a wall. Clara nodded slowly. Yes, and that's why I need your help. Not to fight with fists, Marcus, but to stand with me, to protect Zoe, to protect yourself, until we can get this evidence where it belongs. Marcus let out a rough laugh, tinged with exhaustion and bitterness. I'm no bodyguard. I don't have money. All I've got is an old truck and a shop full of wrenches. Clara met his eyes, unwavering. And that's exactly why I trust you, because you're not in this for power or profit. You're in this because you can't stand bullies, neither can I. Marcus sat in silence for a long while, then pulled the USB toward him. Then we do this. But Clara, if they ever touch Zoe, I won't stop at just standing up. I'll bring the whole thing down on them. Clara gave a small nod, her lips trembling faintly. Then we fight together. Outside, the wind howled against the window, carrying the chill of a coming storm. In that small kitchen, two people who seemed worlds apart, a black single-father mechanic and a powerful businesswoman, had become unlikely allies bound by the same enemy. When Clara left, Marcus stood at the door, watching the sleek car vanish into the night. In his hand, the tiny USB carried truths, powerful enough to topple a corrupt empire. He turned back inside, his eyes falling on Zoe, sleeping peacefully. Her steady breaths soothed him, but also reminded him that every choice from now on wasn't just about him, it was about protecting the innocence in those eyes. Marcus whispered into the darkness. They picked the wrong family. The next morning, Crestwood was heavy with tension. Videos from the diner and the repair shop had spread Marcus's name everywhere. People called him the brave father, but in the shadows, Nathan Cole was seething. A businessman who thrived on fear had now been publicly defied. In his vast office, Daryl and his two men stood with heads bowed. Nathan slammed a newspaper onto the desk, his voice a growl. One mechanic, one single dad. And you let him humiliate me twice. Daryl swallowed hard sweat trickling down his temple. He's tougher than we thought, but we'll handle him. Nathan narrowed his eyes. No, I'll handle him, and when I do, the whole town will remember who really runs Crestwood. Meanwhile, Marcus dropped Zoe off at school before returning to the shop. At the entrance, Clara Reynolds was already waiting with her two bodyguards, a thick folder in hand. It's time, Marcus. We take this to the police. Marcus blinked. And you think they'll listen? Half the force is on Cole's payroll. Clara gave a mysterious smile. Not all of them. I've arranged a meeting with Captain Harris. He's clean. If he sees this evidence, Cole's finished. Marcus clenched his fists. This was their only chance. But he also knew that once Clara handed over the files, Cole would unleash everything in retaliation. That afternoon, as Marcus and Clara left the shop, an unexpected scene awaited them. 3 police cruisers pulled up, red and blue lights flashing. Neighbors gathered, murmuring. From one of the cars, Captain Harris stepped out, his face stern. He looked at Marcus and Clara, then declared before the crowd, "We have warrants for the arrest of Daryl Mason and his associates. Charges assault, intimidation, and destruction of property." Applause erupted. Neighbors cheered as Darrell was dragged out of the black pickup in handcuffs. He snarled, glaring at Marcus. "This ain't over, Johnson," Marcus replied, his voice deep and steady. "It's over when the truth wins." Clara handed the USB drive to Harris, her voice firm. "Inside is everything you need on Nathan Cole. Follow the money and you'll see how deep this runs." Harris nodded, his gaze resolute. "We'll get him. But you two need protection. Cole won't go quietly." Marcus gave a faint, weary smile. "I'm used to not having it quiet." At that moment, Zoe came running from a distance, throwing her arms around her father. "Daddy, are the bad men gone?" Marcus bent down, looking into her eyes. "Some of them are. The rest, they will be." Zoe smiled, a light that seemed to chase away every shadow of fear. Around them, neighbors grew emotional, some even shed tears. That evening, in a small town hall, the Crestwood community gathered. Many shared their stories of being bullied, extorted, and threatened by Cole's men. A video of Marcus played on the big screen, turning him into a symbol of resistance. One man stood up, his voice trembling. "If he can stand up to them, so can we." Applause thundered like a storm. Marcus sat among them, overwhelmed. He had never sought attention, but now he understood. Sometimes standing up doesn't just save one person, it opens the way for an entire community. Days later, police raided Nathan Cole's office. News cameras were there, the streets lined with people. When Cole was led out in his expensive suit, wrists cuffed cheers roared through the town. From a distance, Marcus stood with Zoe perched on his shoulders. She shouted with joy, "Daddy, the bullies lost." Marcus nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "Yes, Zoe, and they always will, as long as we don't back down." Crestwood glowed beneath the autumn sky. News of Nathan Cole's arrest filled the headlines and television broadcasts. For many, it marked the end of a dark era of fear. But for Marcus Johnson, the true change came from a much smaller place, the heart of his daughter. In the repair shop, the hum of engines now sounded like the music of a new beginning. Once gloomy and empty, the place was now bustling with customers. People who had once avoided Marcus's shop out of fear of trouble now returned full of trust and admiration. Zoe ran between the cars, her braids bouncing, clutching a new drawing. She handed it to her father, a picture of Marcus standing before the shop, the sun rising behind him. "Daddy, this is you, the strongest man I know." Marcus smiled, eyes glistening. "No, Zoe, the strongest thing in that picture is the hope you carry." That afternoon, Clara Reynolds arrived with a convoy of sleek cars. She stepped out carrying a large envelope. In Marcus's small office, she placed it on the table. "Marcus, this is the official contract. Reynolds Industries wants you to maintain our entire fleet. Trucks, cars, all of it." Marcus opened the envelope, his eyes widening at the numbers. It was work enough to turn his modest shop into a thriving business enough to secure Zoe's future. He shook his head, still in disbelief. "Why me? There are bigger shops out there, more experienced." Clara smiled, her voice steady. "Because no contract, no amount of experience can buy integrity. And that's what you showed me. That's what you showed your daughter. And that's the kind of man I want my company to stand beside." Marcus signed his hand, trembling but his eyes shining. Zoe clapped her hands, jumping up and down. "Daddy, does this mean we're rich now?" Marcus laughed, scooping her into his arms. "Not rich, Zoe, but safe and strong enough to help others." Clara watched the scene, her expression softening. "You don't realize it yet, Marcus, but you've changed this whole town. People saw what you did. They believe they don't have to bow to bullies anymore." That evening, Marcus took Zoe back to Maple Street Diner, the place where it had all begun. No longer heavy with tension, the room was filled with greetings, applause, and warm voices from familiar faces. The waitress brought out a special pancake, this time topped with 2 bright red cherries. Zoe squealed, "Daddy, 2 cherries this time." Marcus chuckled, glancing around the diner that had become an unforgettable memory. He lifted his coffee cup, his voice rising not only for Zoe, but for everyone listening. Bullies only win when we stay silent, but when we stand together, they fall. Zoe rested her head on his shoulder, her eyes sparkling. "Daddy, can we help someone else next time too?" Marcus bent down, kissed her braided hair, and whispered, "Always, Zoe, always." In that moment, warmth filled the diner. No one spoke, but everyone felt it. This wasn't just the story of a father and daughter. It was proof that courage could change an entire community. Weeks later, Crestwood looked completely different. People no longer bowed their heads when facing bullies. They stood tall, spoke the truth. Zoe's school changed too. The mocking voices had vanished, replaced by respect for the girl with the superhero dad. Marcus stood before his newly expanded repair shop, its sign gleaming a line of Reynolds trucks waiting outside. He breathed deeply, knowing his life had entered a new chapter. But the most important thing wasn't the contract or the money. It was the lesson carved deep into Zoe's heart that when faced with injustice, one must never stay silent. That courage, even from an ordinary mechanic, could change destiny. Marcus watched his daughter playing with neighborhood kids, his heart swelling with faith. He whispered like a vow for the future, "As long as we stand, Zoe, bullies will never win." And so the story of Marcus Johnson and his little daughter Zoe comes to a close. From an ordinary dinner at a diner, they faced some of the most dangerous bullies and turned fear into the strength to protect the truth. If you believe that courage can change an entire community, hit like to spread this message. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next journeys where every victory comes not only from strength, but from a heart that dares to stand on the side of justice. Leave a comment below. Have you ever witnessed a bully being held accountable? If you were in that situation, would you choose silence or to stand up? Your voice will help make this community even stronger. While you wait for the next episode, we've already prepared a few more videos right here beside this one. Trust me, you won't want to miss them. Thank you for watching and for standing with us. See you in the next video where the light of truth will always triumph over the darkness.